Rep Meskers, just let you know we are live streaming on YouTube.
That's good since it's 10:04. I'll
There you
make sure
go.
I don't say anything between 10:04 and 10:05 that makes the Chief Fasaro arrest me.
You're good in my book there, Representative Meskers.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. At some point when I get some downtime, I want to do, I'd like to come up and visit with you and do maybe a walking tour and some of the conversations relating to, I think it's traffic and parking where you have dug your heels in or chomped at the bit and done some serious work. So I want to
Absolutely. We've had some stuff going on for a while. John Burt, the town manager, has been involved in it, as have some of the folks in Stonington as well. So I think it would give you a good idea of where we're at and what maybe we envision for the future, and might be some short-term solutions.
Yeah, and that I might suggest will drag willingly, I suspect, Commissioner Boughton, who's got his ear in Washington on infrastructure.
Well, we welcome that, and my time is yours. So let me know what works for you, and we'll make it happen.
My God, I think you're the first person who's ever said that to me. I really appreciate it. So look, I'd like to convene the meeting. Just, we've been, I wouldn't say fuzzy up until now, but we've been organizationally getting ourselves set up. So this is the piece of the business that is supposed to be in hospitality and tourism, the first committee meeting, right? So organizationally, just so you're aware, I'm anticipating, and I'll take criticism or feedback from the group, I'm anticipating that we should meet every 2 weeks. I'm thinking organizationally, we should meet this time and 2 weeks from now as the individual working groups. And if we think by the end of the next meeting, if we think there are substantive points to begin to discuss, the 2 weeks succeeding, or say 6 weeks from now, we'll have a general group meeting. If we're still in the process of developing plans, I would postpone the general group meeting and let the working groups continue. So I'm kind of trying to figure out, do we do 2 meetings of the working groups, subsequent 2 weeks meeting of the entire committee, or do we need 3 or 4 weeks of committee meetings before we have anything substantive to discuss in the way of proposals? Because I want the ideas to be fleshed out a little bit at the working group level. So I'll leave that to your thoughts and consideration. As well, I would mention there are 2 things that have come before me from Daniel Cheeseborough, which will be circulated at the end of the meeting today, just administratively, came this morning. One is a proposal about a taxing district for the, I guess I wouldn't describe it, I guess not the municipality, but the region. And then some key points that the selectwoman of Stonington has suggested, points about sewers, resiliency, traffic, and parking. Just general points. I want you to familiarize yourselves with those documents before we meet again. In a general bridge of where I want to get to, I think to keep focused on the group and to keep focused on what I'd like us to achieve, I'd like to be coming back when we can come back, when we've achieved some of these objectives, to come back with 3 to 5 suggestions, actionable suggestions for the short term, which I would describe as 6 to 18 months or 24 months. I'm a little flexible, right? So things you think we should be working on in the way of legislation to deliver some solutions in the 6 to 18, 24 months. And then recognizing that some things may resolve, and I'll take it to resiliency or sewers, things that may require more capital and a longer period, I would like to do, say, 18 to 24 months and on, because depending on accessing capital, accessing what we could potentially do, there are certain projects that have to be looked at as long-term planning projects. So I guess I would describe them in layman's terms as relatively quick fixes, which may or may not have a dollar amount imposed, or larger projects that have significant capital and a longer-term planning and development. Because I would like us to come back hopefully in the December timeframe before the session starts, with some actionable items for proposals for public hearings to bring forth concrete, actionable ideas to see if we can get the buy-in from the legislature, right? I want to make, as related to tourism and hospitality and the taxing district, I know, luckily, I want to apologize for Senator Hartley, who had minor surgery, but and it's eye surgery. So she was in getting her eyes checked this morning, and she will be indisposed today, but I expect her to be at the next meeting. So she sends her warm regards to the group. And I guess what I was going to say, if I drifted there, was I'd like us to, on the taxing authority that was brought up, I think if it comes within the purview of commerce, it becomes within the idea of us standing forth or trying to step forth. I'd want to look at the current legislation because there are a couple of taxing authorities. Senator Hartley had mentioned to me. I want to make sure this is, if we look down that road, that the funds are specifically dedicated to the economic development / tourism and hospitality, that it's to develop a return in improving the experiential. That could include traffic and parking, I guess, as well. But I want to make sure it goes and doesn't become a substitute for other tax revenue, but becomes dedicated as an engine for economic development. So I'll be looking at what the other groups look at and try to figure out. Luckily, probably dragging Commissioner Boughton into it as well, just as a thought. I think what I would like to hear from the tourism hospitality group now, all of you as participants, and it's kind of catching you off guard, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts or concerns of what you think the obstacles are as it relates to the hospitality tourism industry and where you think our priorities should be. Preferably along the lines of not parking and infrastructure, although, and not parking and transportation parking or infrastructure. But I'm certainly willing to look at those, and then we'll just move them into the right committee for further discussion. So we could start with whoever wants to raise their hand, or however, Patricia, you want to organize the order of conversation, catching Patricia off guard there. Why don't you be the traffic cop and figure out how we bring people forward on the ideas? And I would look at some point, not to stand here, sorry, Patricia, stand here to be the orchestra leader, but I'm willing to be the orchestra leader this week and think about how we want to organize the group going forward, with me being a participant and not the orchestra leader.
Just a quick question for organizational and minutes purposes. Did you want to go through and decide on chair and co-chair prior to going into issues, or do you want to go right into issues?
I think I would prefer to go into issues. I'd like everyone to think about the ideas, and versus making this a either popularity or other type of contest, I'd appreciate if individually through Patricia you'd approach the co-chair and chair, myself and Senator Hartley, if you'd like to, you know, be involved in organizing or running the working group, so we can have that conversation.
Okay, and if anybody has any issues to bring forward, just raise your hand and I will bring it to the attention of Rep. Miskers.
And I could single out, because I've had good conversations with Amanda, and ask if you want to lead what you think some of the obstacles look like, if no one else is raising their hand. Ah, never mind, you've been co-opted. Rachel Lenda has come to the forefront. Commissioner, is it commissioner or chair?
Director.
Director, okay, perfect.
But I appreciate, maybe one day I'll get that promotion.
There you go.
But thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Please excuse my informalness. I'm on my way to the Big E right now. We've had an unbelievably successful time at the Big E, the Connecticut building. But specifically what I want to talk about is just sort of where we're at from a visitation standpoint. And that does include Mystic. So if we're talking about tourism and hospitality, the first thing that I will mention is that I think is incredibly important is the guest experience. And I come from a tourism and hospitality background. I was in the restaurant industry for a long time. And the first thing I will say is that Mystic has all of the tools to be incredibly successful. They have incredible retail stores, they have incredible attractions, and the restaurateurs there offer first-rate experience. So typically when you're talking about tourism and hospitality, you know, that's sort of the first out of the gate. What are we offering travelers and residents alike? What kind of experience? And Mystic is first class. You know, I think that we've got amazing brands like the Del Mar Hotel going into the Mystic Seaport. So we've got all of the bits in place to make it effective. I think where we struggle the most is in competing with on an advertising dollar. So I will always come back to money because money we know makes the world go round. And if we want to increase visitation, then we have to look at primary, secondary, and tertiary markets of where we're able to pull people in that are interested in Mystic. And specifically, we target 27 million people around the tri-state area from northern New Jersey, New York City, Boston, and the rest of New England, Providence. But Connecticut remains at large one of the largest demographics that we pull from. Right now, it's roughly between 42 and 45% of people who are enjoying the amenities of Connecticut are Connecticut residents, which I think is really interesting. And I think that also lends itself to the macro trends right now of just revenge travel, that Connecticut is in fact down in tourism visitation numbers compared to prior years. And that is has a lot to do with the traveling that people are doing, going to places like Alaska and Paris, France, and all of these bucket list trips that they haven't gone on. And while I would love to say that Connecticut is a bucket list trip, we happen to sort of just fall onto that secondary and tertiary destination. So in regards to tourism and hospitality, the goals of what I would love to see is an attention and focus on how we can compete with other towns and boroughs like us, like Newport, Rhode Island, like Cape Cod, like northern New Jersey, those types of Ocean City sort of towns. That what are they doing in the market right now that's effective in keeping their numbers up? And really what it comes down to is being able to be compelling storytellers, but they also have the budget. Newport, Rhode Island alone has a $5 million marketing budget just for Newport. The state of Connecticut has $4.5 million dedicated to statewide marketing and tourism. So that is a stark difference in what they're able to accomplish versus what we're able to accomplish. And by doing geo-targeted ads around things like Meta, Instagram, Facebook, or targeting ads onto Google and making sure that, we're optimizing our SEO, which is search engine optimization, to make sure that when people type in the most famous phrase, things to do in Mystic, Connecticut, that our information is coming up first and foremost. We keep all of that information updated on a regular basis. So it's no short of efforts in making sure that we're being compelling storytellers and sharing the stories of our local business owners and what they offer. But I think it's a dollar for dollar math behind what we're actually able to put into the market right now to actually compete. And I would say that is not only Mystic, but the state's biggest disadvantage right now. We're very disadvantaged. And that is what I'll say. I've talked way too long, so I want to hear what everybody else has to say. Thank you for the opportunity.
And I appreciate that, Director. I want to reiterate, I don't think there's an objection to I know Scott Dolch. I was in the restaurant business growing up, waiting tables. I've been in banking for 35 years. I don't think I have a problem that we're underspending on tourism. And so I appreciate the advocacy, but where I come down on the issue where I'm trying to direct the committees is basically, I'm not happy with the tourism experience in Mystic at the level of traffic and parking. And I want to hear what else we need to do to make it the zippity-doo-dah best place to go to. So my interest is going to be a little more provincial, although as recognizing my role as co-chair of commerce, I do believe that the tourism dollar needs to increase across the budget for the state. So I'm not challenging you on that. Where I want to keep our eyes focused is what can we do to make sure that everyone comes to Mystic says it's the best experience they've had in the state of Connecticut. I won't tell my Greenwich residents that, but I tell you that I think we have the seeds of making ourselves one of the most attractive seaside places. And if we build out the model, my goal is to build out this model, make it get a successful plan in place for Mystic, and then walk away one day with a self-surviving and supporting plan and move that plan around the various tourist destinations in the state to make it as successful everywhere to try to grow the business. So that's the only difference we would have, Director. I think I agree. We are grossly underspending. I don't think you'll find an argument in the group. And now I think I have Dan Miser. He's got a hand prominently raised. Is that correct?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Two questions, I guess. Representative Meskers, you brought up something that Danielle put forward about taxing district. Could you give us a 30-second on the background on that?
That might be about, you might have gotten my 30 seconds in my brief overview, to be perfectly frank. There are certain taxing districts and authorities that devolve to development groups. I understand there is one in Bridgeport, or I've been told. Though that's hearsay, not fact, so I want to be cautious. But a taxing district becomes, I would think, a legislative delegation of authority to raise a certain tax from certain economic activity that would be redirected towards that community, right? So when I sit there as a banker, knowing that money is fungible, if I'm trying to build tourism, I want to make sure that the funds become incremental to economic development and don't become substitutes for a property tax or another tax. So in other words, we're capturing money that's going to grow the economy of the area. So however we target it, and whether we get the approval, we get the buy-in, that this is going to go way up into a big area. So taxing authority also, generally if you think about it, state aid comes in to help from time to time. The general taxing authority is property, real estate, autos, and that's the taxing authority at the local level. The rest of the revenue ends up in Hartford, so there's always this push and pull. So in broad strokes, it's a question of, do you create a taxing authority? And I'll defer to Commissioner Boughton at some point at DRS, but not to look for either support or not, but what are the difficulties and how we move forward. But it's something I think what we need to do, that's a topic worth conversation.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, it's definitely worth a conversation, and also piggybacks on something that Rachel Lenda was just talking about in regards to Newport. The town of Newport having a $5 million tourism budget just on itself. My wife and I actually went to Newport just for a quick getaway a few nights ago, and I noticed when we paid the hotel bill, it said Newport tax district or Newport, and it was a 1.5% tax that presumably went to the city of Newport. So I'm wondering if that's how they're funding their $5 million tourism budget specifically.
Yeah, I will. That's one of the topics I think. Hopefully, Patricia's taking notes on that. One of the things we'll need to look at going forward is how do the other taxing districts and authorities, not limited to Connecticut, but across the board, and is it an option between the administration and the legislature to look at the potential for that, and how do we make it happen? But I appreciate that.
Yeah, and then the last thing I would say is if we do go down that path or we pursue it at any level, I just want to be clear. I have a healthy dose of skepticism on where that money ends up, and that just comes from past experience. 4 years ago, I was in the room at the table for those conversations with leadership about the additional 1% food and beverage tax for Connecticut restaurants. When that tax was proposed, the Restaurant Association was very adamant and clear that money should go back to the municipalities that was generating that revenue on a pro rata basis. And we had assurances that was going to happen. And that's why we supported that 1%. And then, like so many things do in the last few days of session, that 1% ended up in the black hole of the Connecticut General Fund. Last year, that 1% generated close to $95 million. So it's not an inconsequential number. And I would just like to throw that out there, that if we do go down this path, figuring out some way to make sure that money ends up to where it's going, to where it's actually supposed to be going, would be a real priority for me and the restaurants.
Yeah, and I would tell you that that's why I suggest that it needs to be very descriptive and prescriptive in terms of not becoming a substitute for other revenue sources and be used. You and I might disagree on which piece of economic development needs, if we get down there. We might disagree on what piece of economic development needs the focus. If it's not in the restaurant business and ends up helping more of the hotels or helping more, but it would be for economic development is my point, and not for a general revenue source. So I think that's the hurdle of, like, first we've got to look at the rest of the groups and have some thought about what the models look like away from us, and if it's a approachable model. So I don't want to get further on that. I think that's the topic. Obstacles for the restaurant and hotel associations in Mystic at this point, and they could be backed. I will accept complaints about traffic, but so it doesn't have to be other things. But I think we've explored taxation to my level of intellectual capacity right now, without further delving. So I'd love to talk. What's the problems in the hotel and restaurant business that you see right now in the Mystic area? I'm open for commentary, questions.
I have a few comments perhaps to share. I don't know exactly how local we want to get in this, but public transportation for us is a significant issue. A lot of our staffing, a staffing pool specifically for the hotel, do come in from surrounding communities. They do not live and reside in Mystic. So many of our employees have to depend on public transportation. And oftentimes those schedules do not align with operational needs of the business. So an investment in public transportation would serve multiple purposes: allow more access to a larger staffing pool, also reduce vehicles on the road and the parking demand in downtown to service our hotels, to service our restaurants, to service our retail stores. Also, zoning is very restrictive in our community. Some of the as a business owner here, who has gone through significant investment into our property over the last 7-8 years, there are restrictive zoning ordinances in place that can make investment into our community challenging. Substantial improvement, 50% SI threshold being one of them.
50%, sorry?
Substantial improvement thresholds.
Okay.
I know every municipality has a different threshold and look back period, but substantial improvement being one of them. But investing in the infrastructure that allows business owners the capability to invest in their properties, and investing in the community infrastructure that allows more people to access our community, I think would be at the forefront of my thoughts as it relates to downtown Mystic.
Okay, and I would, as we're in a public meeting and as we're having a conversation, I would suggest I think I'll entertain those concerns, but those recommendations, those are not going to be resolved at the state level. Mm-hmm. Those would be suggestions for the community to bring to, community action should they choose that there's enough support. because I'm very cautious about the home rule issues that way. I'm looking to try to improve the experience and not end up in a fight on the home rule front. I don't think that's a winning strategy coming from being, the state rep from the furthest point in the, from Mystic. I'm not going to tell Mystic what to do. I'm going to offer solutions that the state could bring in some level and with local buy-in and support, which is why, John Burton, Daniel Cheeseborough are definitely on the committee. I think, Bill, you've had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to address, I know the perennial discussion about tourism funding, but maybe think a little bit more. A couple of people have mentioned the user experience once we get to Mystic, basically not just getting people here, but what happens once they get here. And I think that is certainly something worth thinking about. And it gets down to the granular level of traffic on 95, managing that both at the DOT and enforcement level. Cell phone service. Rep Meskers, when you first called me about being on this committee, we couldn't even have the conversation because there's just no cell phone service a lot of times here. And just, the ability to move people around. And I think as we think about tourism marketing too, we have to acknowledge that, we talk about Newport, and I think there's a local contingent that says, hey, the last thing we want is this to be Newport, right? So while we're all promoting tourism, there is sort of an entrenched residency that is really concerned about how an increase in tourism is going to affect them. And I think we have to acknowledge that and think about it. And I think as part of any plan, you have to acknowledge what's going to happen to people once they get here. And a lot of this obviously gets into infrastructure, but how do we move them around? Where do they go? Where do they park? And again, obviously, this is obviously a separate transportation and infrastructure issue. But, just thinking of that general user experience and not just of visitors, but of residents too, I think are pretty important to keep in mind if we're going to ultimately move forward and get everyone's buy-in.
Yeah, I would tell you that probably then for the tourism for this group, the question becomes a combination. It's a quality of life / quality of experience. Because I'm hoping that improving the quality of the experience of the tourist, which is resolving the traffic issue, improves the quality of life of the residents, right? The last thing I want is to drive congestion and a bad experience for the visitor and a bad experience for the resident. So I think maybe that should be part of the charge of what we think in relation to enhancing the tourist experience is maybe the tourist / resident experience if we're going to try to do any kind of a build out or support of the area. Because what we want is what we need, we have to have buy-in at the local level. And we want to make it a good experience for the residents, that they turn around and see the improvements as being quality of life issues that improve their experience. That's super important.
Right.
I noticed Chief Fusaro had his hand up. I don't know if he's still available or if I lost him.
No, Mr. Chair, I'm still here. I think in getting on this call, I didn't realize they were broken down, so I may not be an official member of this subgroup, but I can offer some insight and maybe speak to a point that Amanda brought up. From a local aspect, we always have that challenge of balancing the tourism with the residents. We hear from the residents a lot. We understand that the issues and the challenges that they experience living in what was once a rather quaint village of Mystic. It is no longer as quaint as it used to be. But I do see where all these issues with parking and transportation and everything else plays a role into the tourism aspect of this. But more specifically to Amanda's point, the workers obviously have to get downtown Mystic. They have to have a viable way of getting to their place of employment. And what we have experienced over years through studies, through analysis, through our own internal data collection, as well as contracting with some more experienced people when it comes to parking and managing what we have in the downtown Mystic area and balancing it with the desires or lack of desires for certain parking facilities. There is an issue that we constantly encounter, which is the workers down there. There's limited parking. Many of the parking spaces in downtown Mystic are usually occupied by some of the workers. And that's something that we've been challenged with over the last several years in our own little working groups, is how to find an area for them to park, to put their cars, so that the prime parking in areas downtown Mystic can turn over. And it's something that we've been looking at for time. And I do think it plays into the tourism part, because it compounds all of those other issues of traffic, of congestion, of, you know, people getting accessibility to the restaurants and facilities and stores in downtown Mystic that they want to go to. So I just thought I'd offer that. We've looked at that for many, many years. It is, in my mind, it is the number one challenge that impacts everything else that we're discussing around here. And it's something that, yes, the municipalities have a role to play, our elected and appointed officials, but I think that's where we need to work in concert with the business owners and the residents of downtown Mystic.
I really appreciate that. So if I could say, it's kind of interesting. The issue of economic development is going to be, and tourism is going to, at some level, part of the big topic we've discussed is taxation at some level to start with, and then parking and transportation. The issue of parking and transportation, I think we need to have three. I'm directing this towards Patricia for note taking and for follow-up. For transportation, we need to think about tourists, residents, and workers. And there's separate groups that each need some resolution to the congestion issue to improve the experience for all three of them and jointly for all of us. So we break down the groups as to tourists, workers, and residents. I think it's probably good that we keep them asking if the solution solves all three groups, one of the three groups, two of the groups, none of the groups. So we start thinking about that we're not impacting adversely any of the three groups. We're trying to make, like, the workers need a good experience, need affordable parking to go to work. The residents need parking that they can get to in the town that they are the residents of. And the tourists need to be someplace where they're happy and not blocking the residents, if you will. So they're having a good experience. I think that frames what I'd be looking for as goals there. I see the director, before I go back to the director of tourism, has anyone else got a comment they want to make at this moment in time? Dan, I'll go to Rachel first because you've already spoken once as well. So I'll give you both a second go around. Rachel, director.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to follow up on a couple of statements that were made. And, you know, my comments earlier were regarding the tourism and the hospitality. I realized that parking and the infrastructure of transportation is a really big issue. But I would beg to ask the question of, you know, the guest experience coming into Mystic, coming into Connecticut. You know, I just did a quick search through TripAdvisor, through Yelp, and all of the major attractions in Mystic carry extremely high reviews, 4.5 to 4.75 stars out of 5. So if we're talking about improving the tourism experience in and around Mystic, that doesn't relate to transportation and parking, or, you know, any other topics that are going to be discussed in those other subcommittees, if we're talking just tourism and hospitality, then, you know, I would love to ask the question to the group of, in their opinion, what is lacking right now for the guest experience? Because right now, as it stands, guest reviews of these establishments like the Whalers Inn, like Dan Miser's incredible restaurants, they're all, I mean, Shipwright's Daughter was just named one of the top 50 restaurants in the country, and Port of Call is doing incredible things. So I'm just curious to understand what is lacking as far as a tourism guest experience. Is there a lack of attractions? Is there a lack of certain types of attractions that can grow the area more and gain different sort of interest? So that was the question I wanted to ask.
You know, Director, I thought we'd be back on the tourism budget. I think this is a phenomenal question, and it really is very helpful. So I really thank you for that. And I'd like to put the group on notice or on spot. give us some idea what else you think on the experiential side we should be thinking about.
Rep Meskers, we have Chris Regan.
Ah,
Thank you.
Chris, I don't know why I don't see your hand raised, and I don't see on my screen, but go ahead.
Sitting here with Holly Cheeseman.
Ah, okay.
The what I would say in regards to hospitality and tourism is how do we sustain it and keep it going and be robust and not have a dip in the market. And I think that's dollars being spent in tourism,
Mhm.
and educating the tourist about the experiences that we have to offer. And I think that's where we lack the ability to expand it beyond the 42% of Connecticut residents that are tourist numbers. I think we need to get it where it goes out to the tri-state area, into the international markets. And that will be more robust for us. And it's about more heads and beds to get the ROI for the state of Connecticut. I think that's my thrust in regards to the tourism end of it. The parking, the transportation, those are all different subcommittees that we need to talk about how we're going to solve those issues. But I think in regards to this, our task is to make sure that we give the pathway to make sure we're robust. We never go back to $1 a budget for tourism. We need to make sure it's concise for the district or for the greater Mystic area, because based on what you told me in the last meeting, is that this is for the greater Mystic area. And that's where we need to focus it on. And how do we improve that experience is by educating the traveler and give a more quality stay. So it's not 1 or 2 days, it's a 3 to 5 to 7 days. And then we all benefit. So that's.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I guess that's why I'm glad you caught up on it. This is a greater Mystic area tourism bill. It's not to boil the ocean, as my co-chair likes to say, and I love that expression. So it's to find specific actionable issues that are within our purview and within the will of the assembly to bring forward to take through public hearings. So we're really looking to represent your voices and make things happen, right? I mean, so this is a point of, I think, that takes it just beyond your local legislators, who are all doing a great job, but it takes it into a committee of cognizance to say, what can we do to help? And that's basically why we're doing this. Dan, you had your hand raised again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Chief Pizarro very quickly, because the point that he was making about worker transportation, and Amanda was talking about that as well, is a huge issue for us. It's not just worker transportation, it's worker housing. I know Danielle has made affordable housing in Stonington a priority for her. And there's been a few initiatives in the past, but just curious, Chief, the idea of having these offsite lots that maybe there's, a shuttle bus or something like that. Where are we at with that, or how have those ideas sort of panned out, if you don't mind me asking?
So a couple of years ago, when myself and then Chief Stewart and started talking about this and developed kind of a plan and put some other folks from both Stonington and Groton involved in it. And we started looking at some of the churches and places in downtown that made their parking lots available. I can't really speak to the affordable housing. I'll going to drop back and punt on that one to our Office of Planning and Development and our town manager. But we've looked at some of those areas, and quite frankly, it's just we're limited in space in Mystic, right? And that's the real challenge. It's attractive. There are limited opportunities to put parking in certain areas, potentially some shuttles. There have been discussions, but quite frankly, things haven't gotten off the ground in total. But there have been identified areas where we now have some agreements where parking happens. That's really done with a quasi-public-private partnership. You're probably aware of some of the churches. I know on the Stonington side, there's St. Patrick's, and we've got a couple on the Groton side that have opened up their lots for people to park in. And usually the people that utilize those the most are the most familiar with downtown Mystic, right? The residents or people that live nearby that go to Mystic quite often. Does that kind of speak to what you were talking about, Dan?
Yeah, I was just curious where we're at, and you know, just knowing the area, I feel you. There's not a ton of available space for people to park, but I do think, and Chair Mesker is just you know, I think this topic is so relevant. You know, I know you want us to identify what items specifically could make the tourism experience better for the guest. And to Rachel's point, I think I would just respond to that with, I think we're doing a pretty damn good job right now, you know, and I don't know that that, you know, a legislative action to try to enhance guest experience in terms of you know, the dining experience or the overnight experience at the hotel is anything that even we're necessarily looking for. I think the private entities, whether it's the Seaport or Bill's group or our group or the Shipwrights Inn or Shipwright's Daughter and the Whalers Inn, I think they do a fantastic job. I think really what impacts the guest experience is the ability to move people in and out of town. I think what really impacts the guest experience is the level of service, which you know, we keep sort of circling back to, is so impacted by the number and quality of workers and staff that we're able to attract to the area because of transportation issues and because of housing issues for those people. So I think whether we like it or not, I think probably what we're going to be talking a lot about is going to be some of those infrastructure questions, and certainly you know, the marketing piece. But in an effort to be helpful and to answer your question, I think one of the resources in Mystic that is not fully utilized, that can move people, and quite frankly, if you really boil it down, is arguably at the root of why everyone's coming to Mystic, is the water. You know, it's the river, the Mystic River. You know, there's sort of, Bill and I were talking about this morning. You know, Mystic has marketed itself and positioned itself as this quaint little seaside town in New England, when in fact that's not really what we are. We're on a river. There's parts of the village that get close to brackish. And the reality is so much of the Mystic experience, unfortunately, is not a waterfront experience. You know, we don't have beaches. You know, there are a few private companies that do, you know, river tours. The Seaport does the Sabino, which is the river boat that goes up and down, which is great, and people love that. And I think any opportunity, again, to answer your question, any opportunity that we have to connect someone coming to Mystic with the actual waterfront and the water, whether it's paddleboarding, swimming, you know, being on a river boat or river ferry, I think is a great opportunity. So maybe we could look at some opportunities and ways to engage guests coming to Mystic and let them encounter the actual water and waterfront by being either, you know, on it or in it. And that could also lead to other conversations about moving people, you know, whether it's grabbing people up by the Seaport, who, again, I don't want to speak for Peter and the Seaport team, but they have more parking than anyone in town. Maybe there's an opportunity for people to park up there and have a state-funded Mystic River shuttle that could move people up and down the river, including workers. You know, maybe that's a two birds with one stone. But thank you.
No, I appreciate you. At the beginning of your conversation, I was like, well, maybe we should shrink the groups to the 2 groups versus the 3 groups. But I think what's coming out as you went through your conversation, I was going to say meander, but that was me. It's not a criticism. You actually wandered in a very constructive way. The issue that you need our help with, in my humble opinion, is the workforce experience and enhancing the availability of a workforce. So that may be transportation, that may be shuttles, that may be a bunch of things. So maybe the weakest link for hospitality in experiencing, and which would not just be hospitality, it's the restaurants, it's the tour, it's the hotels, it's the shops, is workforce accessibility to the site, workforce housing potentially, which is a bigger issue, which is outside my realm or outside the realm of the committee potentially. But these are topics that should be brought up in terms of if we need to go there, do we need to have a hearing and bring up those topics and figure out if there are potential solutions? But those are two. I like the idea of keeping the group because we just fleshed out that workforce issues, workforce retention, parking, their experience, facilities. How do we incorporate? And this is something that will go well, I think, for many of us in the legislature. How do we incorporate a greater area surrounding Mystic in the workforce, both in integration training, et cetera? Is everyone being prepped? Are our community colleges and hotels, community colleges and colleges providing feeder groups for the restaurant and hotel industry? We have nearby places. I know we've got, Gateway down in New Haven is doing a good restaurant program. Is there an opportunity? Do we need to look at some kind of restaurant program in somewhere closer to where you guys are? I'm open and I'm not but those are kinds of topics that might be worth part of our exploration, right? So
Right.
maybe helping with the workforce or the attractiveness of your area and making it easy to get the workforce there might be topics that are worth thinking about for hospitality and tourism. That may be where the state has a role. I don't think I want to be putting chocolates on the pillows. I agree. I think you guys know what you're doing. Amanda.
To kind of build off of Dan's point, one of the biggest surprises to me when moving here back in 2017 was how I think underutilized our outdoor spaces are in our community. The river being one of them, the waterfront access. But we spend a lot of time talking about where we are going to put cars. Where are we going to park them? And I don't really see a lot of effort, dialogue, or conversation about other forms of accessibility to our community. Improving our roads, improving pedestrian access to our community, which I think would have equally as large of an impact as building parking garages on the perimeter of our town. I am not from Connecticut. I'm not from this area, and this mentality that we seem to have here and that we seem to endorse here is that I should be able to find a parking spot in front of the restaurant I want to dine at, or in front of the shop I'm going to pop in to buy a gift at. Where you go to Newport, you go to Portland, you go to Newburyport, you go to Charleston, South Carolina, and the expectation is that you're going to find a public parking garage or public parking lot, and then you're going to walk 10 minutes to your final destination. And that is generally accepted and probably honestly leads to more dollars being spent in your communities as visitors walk from point A to point B and see the coffee shop and see the cute retail establishment they want to go into. So I think that we should also be paying a fair bit of attention on ways that we can make our community more pedestrian friendly and capitalize on the outdoor space that we have that I think is pretty underutilized. The Mystic River Park, for example.
Amanda, I love that idea. And I think, Tricia, that's another point I think for development for the hospitality tourism is it's a different spin on transportation and parking. It's walkability. And walkability as an issue for economic development, to improve the experience of the walking through the area, to improve sales and economic activity. I like the idea a lot. So I think it's not a bad topic to try to further develop. Maybe throwing it back through transportation to figure out how we weave it into the parking transportation issue, right? but I think that's a need. You're telling me we need to make the experience of walking through Mystic positive.
Walkability, bikeability, wayfinding, I think could use some improvement. And just, you know, from a community perspective, and particularly a resident perspective, utilization of our public green spaces, which are very limited, shockingly limited in a town, or in a community like ours. And so how we could better utilize those as a community asset.
Perfect. Director Linda.
I've been very opinionated on this call. Thank you for the opportunity to talk again. So something that has sort of kicked around in my thoughts, and I think that the state of Connecticut does an incredible job with leveraging public-private partnerships and marrying, you know, state funds with private entities. And you know, we're on the forefront of entrepreneurship and we're on the forefront of innovation. So would it be advantageous for us to think about a sort of grant system for budding entrepreneurs who have skin in the game, right? Who have capital to invest, but maybe not enough in a business, you know, almost like Deep's RFI request for partners. But come in and, you know, operate a business along the Mystic River for intermodal transportation, or perhaps a, you know, parking garage conglomerate or something, but really trying to figure out the private companies out there where we can partner with them. Because I do think as a state, we do that incredibly well. And we are a model state for public-private. And I know that is one of our governor's prized tactics when he's you know, out and about talking about, you know, how we can increase the number of small business owners, medium-sized business owners, and if we're encouraging them to come to the table with a proposal, if we have a specific set of parameters, you know, would that be something that we could entertain in and around the Mystic area to promote new businesses opening up that can satisfy the needs that we have? And that would be my thought.
Yeah. So I'll walk that back because I really do like the idea, but actionable plan, I would think what we have to go is refer back to transport and parking. In transport, we would have to get through maybe DOT and the idea of a plan. The idea then is who's the participant in the plan. And if it's a plan, like if we see the opportunity for water taxi and we see the need for the parking and we identify locations, then the question of how becomes that interesting issue where we talked about potentially taxing district, et cetera, or taxing district in combination with the private public partnership on how do we build structure or develop it forward. So those I think are logical. So I like the idea. I think that's something to bring forward too. I think my poor clerk on this her fingers are going to run off as we move through this. I don't think we've come to boiling the ocean, but I think we've got a lot of ideas on the list that I think are pretty constructive. If you would all, and I will not be either embarrassed or upset, if all of you, you know, after the meeting today, because we're going to be adjourning soon, because I get 10:58, we should be ending at 11 on this committee. We'll step into the next committee. If you have ideas, one, if you're happy with my leadership and want me to stay on this level, I'm fine. I won't be insulted if you think organizationally, if I come back and I'm not the arbiter here, because I can talk all day, but I'm perfectly happy if you guys have interest in stepping forward or prefer me to be the orchestra leader. I'm perfectly happy. John, I see you at the bottom of the list, John, and Mayor Passo. John, any comments you want to bring forward as the town manager?
I did. However, I'm trying to get onto another computer. I'm sorry. I'm on my iPad and it keeps dropping off. There were times I wanted to comment. I'm waiting if Patricia could let me on. I'm waiting to join through another computer. It looks like it's connecting now. So
We'll
at
put
this point,
on the spot here, Patricia.
Yeah, okay, it's coming on now. Thanks.
There you go.
And some of it can wait to the other committees. There was some talk about workforce, getting them to work is definitely an issue. And one thing, the town of Groton as well as Stonington is looking at affordable housing. Matter of fact, where the 99 Gold Star restaurant was, we've got some, kind of the price range. Some of it is workforce housing level. It's not actual workforce housing. That is a priority though. There are a lot of challenges with the offsite transportation. Buses, we'd like to see more, enhanced busing. The problem is places are open really late. Buses don't tend to run that. So we definitely need to look at some other options for things like shuttles. So we can get more into that to the later next committee.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, John. Anyone else want to finish with a closing comment? And where I was going is that, if you'd like me to continue, I'm fine. If you'd like to step up, I'll take that to the co-chair and we'll see how we organize for the next meeting. I think we will circulate the list of suggestions, if you can, Patricia, the line items we've mentioned, and if people could give us potential priority to pursue, whether in the relation to parking, workforce, there are a lot of different issues. They will be referred to the other committees in terms of purview if they think they need to go there. But we'll ask you to, these would be our number one priorities from the group who's on the meeting today. I'd like to hear your thoughts. And if there's something that you want to bring forward in the next meeting, please come back out to Patricia. And Patricia, that can be circulated just to the co-chairs of the topic they want to bring forward. Okay. I think with that, we'll conclude this meeting. I think it's been helpful. We still have a lot of work to get done, but I'm hopefully between this meeting and we'll take on the conversation one more time. Okay, and thank you. Patricia, you can pause the recording if you need to, or if that's the problem, or YouTube if I guess you're not recording. Pause the broadcast and wait for the next meeting to start. Say at 11:05.